The knock on my door came at 7:16 a.m. on a Saturday. I remember the time because I was halfway through my first coffee, still in gym shorts, and watching the sun bounce off the water behind my house piece, until it wasn't. I opened the door to find her standing there, Theresa Zimmerman, the queen bee of the Lakeside Pines HOA. Bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses despite the shade, and a clipboard held like a sword. "Good morning, mister." "Avery Johnson," she said with that fake sweet tone that always preceded nonsense. "We need to talk about your jet ski." I blinked. "My jet ski," the noise. "Several neighbors have complained you were on the lake after 8 p.m. again. That violates community quiet hours, page 12 of the bylaws." "I'll be issuing a formal fine." I let out a laugh. "Theresa, I wasn't even on the lake last night. I was at my brother's place in Tallahassee." She squinted at me like I just told her the earth was flat. "Well, someone was using your jet ski." "It was on my dock," I said, "chained up." "I can show you the camera footage if you want." She waved that off fast, like the truth was inconvenient. "Regardless, the fine is $150. It's already being processed." "Processed for something I didn't do? Our decision is final," she said. I stood there, stunned. I'd lived in Lakeside Pines for 5 years. Never missed a payment, mowed my lawn like a soldier, and even helped fix the community gate last fall. But Theresa had been itching for a reason to come after me ever since I voted against her plan to raise HOA dues to build a second tennis court. I watched her strut back toward her golf cart like she'd just won a battle. That morning, I dug into my security camera footage. Sure enough, my jet ski hadn't moved, not an inch. I emailed the footage to the HOA board, no reply. By Monday, the fine invoice showed up in my mailbox anyway, bold letters, due in 10 days. That's when I decided if they were going to play dirty, I'd dig deeper than they expected. I started asking around about the HOA clubhouse. It was a cozy little building near the lake, with a stone patio and a fireplace. Theresa hosted meetings there every month, and it was her pride and joy, but something about it never sat right with me. It wasn't on the original neighborhood blueprint I'd seen when I bought the house. So I drove to the county office, took a number, and asked for the permitting history of the Lakeside Pines clubhouse. The clerk, an older guy with a buzz cut and a Mountain Dew on his desk, typed for a while. Then he looked up. "There's no record of any permit for a clubhouse at that address." "What about utility hookups, inspections, anything?" He shook his head. "Nada. If someone built it, they did it under the radar." I felt something click in my brain. Theresa Zimmerman was fining me for a jet ski I didn't use while holding HOA meetings in a building that, legally speaking, didn't exist. I thanked the guy, headed straight home, and printed the documents he gave me. I wasn't going to just fight the fine. I was going to bury it with the truth. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, and I made sure to clear my evening plans. I didn't RSVP or ask to be added to the agenda. I knew if I did, Theresa would find some excuse to shut me down before I even opened my mouth. Instead, I brought a manila folder filled with the county's documents, a printed timeline of the clubhouse's construction, and an extra copy of our HOA's own bylaws highlighted. At precisely 7 o'clock, I walked through the front doors of the clubhouse and took a seat in the back row. A few heads turned. Most people here were the usual crew retirees who wanted peace and quiet, younger couples trying to climb the neighborhood's social ladder, and a few tired-looking professionals who'd been guilted into showing up. Theresa stood at the front with her usual air of artificial authority, flanked by 2 board members. Greg, who nodded at everything like a bobblehead and hadn't read a full document since the Bush administration, and Denise, who used to be a paralegal and had a sharp mind when she wasn't steamrolled. Theresa cleared her throat. "Let's begin. First, a reminder that all residents must adhere to our quiet hours. We've had another violation involving watercraft." "Actually," I said, standing, "about that." She froze. She wasn't used to being interrupted. "Mr. Johnson, you're not on the agenda." "Right, but since you brought it up, I figured this was the perfect time to address it." I held up a stack of printed pages. "I have footage showing my jet ski wasn't used on the night in question." And I brought signed affidavits from 2 neighbors who were home and confirm they didn't hear anything unusual. But more importantly, I walked forward, dropping the documents on the table in front of her. I found something a bit more concerning. Denise leaned forward, peeking at the papers. Theresa didn't touch them. This clubhouse, I continued, letting my voice carry, was built without a single county permit. No inspection, no utility authorization, no approval of any kind. Which means, under county ordinance, this structure is illegal. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through leaves. Theresa opened her mouth, but I kept going. I pulled the property plats from the year this was built. Not only was there no permit filed, but whoever submitted the HOA's annual budget that year listed the expenses as landscaping upgrades. That's misrepresentation. And since HOA funds are collected from all of us, that puts the entire board under scrutiny for financial misconduct. Greg looked like he was trying to disappear into his chair. Denise picked up the papers and began flipping through them, her brows knitting together. "This is completely out of line," Theresa snapped, voice rising. "You have no authority to accuse. I'm not accusing," I said, calm. "I already filed a request with the county inspector's office. They're opening an investigation. If they confirm the structure is unpermitted, the HOA could face 5-figure fines and be forced to tear down the clubhouse. And if financial records were falsified to hide its construction, that's a criminal offense." The room went silent except for the rustle of paper in Denise's hands. A man in the third row stood up. "Mr. Navarro, a retired fire marshal. Unpermitted structures also violate fire codes. If that fireplace was installed without inspection, this whole place is a hazard." Now the room was awake. Neighbors began murmuring to each other. A few took out their phones. Theresa's lips were pressed into a thin, pale line. "I move that we immediately suspend all HOA fines and penalties until this matter is resolved," said Denise, her voice sharp and clear. "And I want a full audit of our last 5 years of expenditures." Greg hesitated. Theresa gave him a hard look, but he nodded. "I second the motion," he said, barely audible. "I'm calling this meeting into recess," Theresa said, turning toward the back. "You don't have the authority to do that unilaterally," Denise called after her. Theresa didn't stop walking. She stormed out the side door, golf cart keys jangling in her hand. After she left, a few people came up to me. One offered to help dig into old budgets. Another thanked me for speaking up. I didn't stay long. I'd done what I came to do. The next morning, I got a call from the county inspector, Mark Bellamy. He sounded more amused than surprised. "Mr. Johnson, you were right. That clubhouse isn't even on our radar, not a single permit. And get this, when I pulled the satellite images from 5 years ago, the building wasn't there. Which means it was built after the community was approved, which violates their development agreement." "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "Well, for starters, they'll get cited. But if they used HOA funds to build it and didn't disclose it properly, that could be fraud. I've already looped in code enforcement and the county attorney's office. We'll be visiting the site Monday." I thanked him and hung up. That same afternoon, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. It said the fine against me had been withdrawn upon further review. No apology, no explanation. Just a quiet reversal, but I wasn't done. I filed a public records request with the city clerk's office. I wanted access to every HOA filing for the past 10 years' budgets, minutes, annual reports, the works. It took a few days, but when I picked up the USB drive, it was all there. I spent the weekend combing through the files, cross-referencing every expense line with bank statements and vendor invoices. That's when I found it. A payment to Lakeside Consulting and Development for land improvement services in the exact amount of $38,000 the same year the clubhouse appeared. Only one problem: no such company existed. I searched the state business registry. Nothing. No license, no tax ID, no public filings, so I looked deeper. Eventually, I found a DBA filing from 6 years ago. The listed owner, Theresa Zimmerman, it was a shell company. She'd paid herself. I sat back in my chair, stunned. This wasn't just an unpermitted building. This was embezzlement. The next day, I drove to the county courthouse and filed a fraud complaint with the district attorney's office. I handed over the USB drive, the vendor records, and a typed summary of my findings. The clerk who took the complaint raised her eyebrows when she saw Theresa's name. That's not the first time we've heard about her, she said under her breath. By Thursday, 2 county investigators were on site at the clubhouse, taking photographs and measurements. Theresa tried to block their access, but they handed her a letter signed by the county attorney. She stepped aside without a word. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night, but this time, Theresa didn't show. Denise opened the meeting with a motion to suspend Theresa from all HOA duties pending investigation. The vote passed unanimously. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The room was buzzing with a different kind of energy now, not fear, not deference. It was quiet determination. We weren't just fighting a fine anymore, we were taking back our neighborhood. By the following Monday, the county's official notice was nailed to the front doors of the clubhouse. Unsafe structure, do not enter. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance like a warning to everyone who had once gathered there for wine tastings and rule amendments. The building that had been Theresa's sanctuary was now sealed and off limits. That same afternoon, I received a voicemail from a detective named Carla Mendez with the County Financial Crimes Division. She wanted to meet in person regarding my fraud complaint. When I showed up at her office the next morning, she already had a printed binder with my name on it and half the contents of the HOA's financial records inside. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been with this department 15 years. Never seen a homeowner hand over a cleaner paper trail than our own auditors." "What happens now?" I asked. "We're expanding the investigation. That shell company Theresa used, we traced payments from the HOA's account to it over a 5-year period. Not just the clubhouse landscaping, pressure washing, even a supposed irrigation overhaul that never happened. So she's been siphoning funds for years. Hundreds of thousands," Mendez confirmed. "And it gets worse." She handed me a printed email from a former board member, someone who'd resigned quietly 2 years ago. The email detailed a pattern. Board votes conducted without quorum, budget approvals with none of the required transparency, and a growing number of line items marked as miscellaneous community improvements with no receipts to back them up. She was issuing payments under fake vendor names, Mendez continued. "We believe at least 2 other board members were aware, possibly complicit. The implications hit like concrete. This wasn't a case of one power-hungry HOA president bending rules. It was a full-scale scheme and entrenched system that had been bleeding the neighborhood dry under the radar." "Is she going to be arrested?" I asked. Mendez nodded. "We're preparing a warrant, but we're also coordinating with the state attorney's office. There's a chance she'll be charged under the racketeering statute." I left the building with a copy of the report summary and a growing sense that the storm was just getting started. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors. Word had spread fast someone had spotted a county investigator photographing the community's entry signage, and rumors were flying. That evening, I spotted Denise knocking on my front door. She looked more focused than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked. "We need to talk." I led her to the kitchen, where a pot of chili was simmering on the stove. She glanced at the folders on my counter, some still open from the research I hadn't stopped doing. "I've been reviewing all of last year's financials," she said, lowering her voice like the walls might be listening. "Theresa authorized a reserve fund transfer in April, $43,000. I frowned. "For what? That's the thing." "It was labeled emergency infrastructure repair, but no work was done. I checked with the contractor listed on the invoice. He's a real guy, but he says he hasn't done a single job in this neighborhood." "Did she forge the invoice?" "Worse. She used a legitimate contractor's name and license number, then routed the payment through another company she registered under her cousin's name." I leaned back in my chair. "She's laundering money," Denise nodded. "And if we don't get ahead of it, the entire HOA could be liable. That means liens, lawsuits, and possibly a special assessment to make up for the missing reserves. She'll bankrupt the neighborhood before she lets go. Not if we act fast." We spent the next several hours drafting a motion to dissolve the current HOA board under emergency provisions outlined in the bylaws. It required a 2/3 majority vote from homeowners, a tall order, but not impossible with the evidence we had. The next morning, I walked door to door with printed packets. Each one included a summary of financial irregularities, screenshots of deposit records, and contact information for the county investigator. I skipped no one, even the residents who'd always sided with Theresa. One of them, a retired Air Force colonel named Howard, stood silently on his porch flipping through the papers. "She told me the clubhouse was a donation," he muttered. "Said a local developer sponsored it. Theresa's a lot of things," I said. "But she's never been generous." He signed the petition without another word. By the end of the week, we had over 70% of the neighborhood's signatures. Denise filed the emergency motion with the HOA's legal administrator, and a special meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It didn't take long for Theresa to catch wind of what was coming. That weekend, she appeared at the front gates with 2 other board members in tow, demanding access to the clubhouse to retrieve important documents. A county deputy showed up within minutes to inform her that the building was still under investigation and any attempt to enter would be considered obstruction. She didn't argue. She just stood there, jaw tight, and walked back to her car like someone trying not to be seen. Tuesday night arrived, and every seat in the community center borrowed from a nearby neighborhood was filled. Denise stood at the front, flanked by 2 volunteer moderators. I sat in the front row with a copy of the fraud report at my feet. "This meeting has been called under emergency provisions," Denise began. "Tonight, we vote on the immediate dissolution of the current HOA board and the appointment of a temporary oversight committee until a new election can be held." Before any arguments could begin, one of the moderators held up a sealed envelope. "This is a certified notice from the county clerk's office," he said. "Theresa Zimmerman was arrested at 9:45 this morning on charges including wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing false documents." The room erupted. Some gasped, others whispered furiously. One woman stood up and clapped twice before sitting back down, red-faced but unapologetic. The vote passed with overwhelming support. Within minutes, the board was dissolved, and a 5-member interim committee was installed including myself, Denise, and 3 others who had spent the last few weeks helping to untangle the mess. The following day, a forensic accountant began reviewing what remained of the HOA's funds. What he found was worse than expected. Several payments had been routed through a string of small businesses linked to Theresa's extended family. A landscaping firm, a pest control company, even a fake consulting group that billed for neighborhood beautification strategy sessions. All of it was fake, and all of it had been approved by a board that either didn't care or was collecting a slice. The state's attorney held a press conference later that week, announcing formal charges against Theresa and 2 former board members. The list was long and damning: grand theft, money laundering, falsifying financial records, conspiracy to commit fraud. But what stuck with me most was something Detective Mendez said offhand after the cameras were off. "People like her count on silence. They know most folks won't dig, won't ask questions. You did." I didn't say anything then. I just thought about how it started with a fake fine over a jet ski that never left the dock. Now the clubhouse was condemned, the ringleader was in jail, and the neighborhood had taken its first real breath of freedom in years. But we weren't finished yet. A new election was coming. And for the first time, the community wasn't just watching, they were wide awake. By the time the forensic audit was fully underway, our newly formed oversight committee had set up shop in a borrowed conference room at the local library. It wasn't glamorous, but it had Wi-Fi, coffee, and best of all, no Theresa. We met daily, rotating shifts to comb through everything the HOA had touched over the last 6 years. Denise coordinated legal counsel through a pro bono civic group, while the rest of us worked through spreadsheets, scanned invoices, and cataloged years of unchecked spending. On a damp Thursday morning, just as I was settling in with a binder labeled Vendor Contracts Landscaping, Denise walked in with a thick manila envelope. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me and crossed her arms. Inside were copies of deposit slips, all from the HOA's operating account. Each was made out to a local paving company I'd never heard of. 5 separate transfers, all under $5,000. That seemed harmless at first, until I flipped to the last page. "This company doesn't exist," Denise said, her tone even but tight. "No state license, no tax ID, no address that isn't a UPS drop box." I looked at the amounts. Each one was just low enough to stay under the bank's automatic fraud reporting threshold. She knew the red flags, I said. She was staying beneath them. She was also forging board signatures. I found 2 checks from last year signed by Greg. He told me yesterday he hasn't authorized a payment since 2020. I leaned back in the chair, eyes scanning the deposit dates. They lined up perfectly with the months we were told the reserve fund was low due to emergency expenditures. In truth, Theresa was funneling money into ghost accounts, piece by piece, with forged approvals. "We need to loop Mendez back in," I said. Denise nodded. "Already did. She's coming by at 1 this afternoon, and she's bringing someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office." That got my attention. County-level charges were one thing, but if this was crossing state lines or involving federal fraud laws, we were in a whole new arena. By 1 o'clock, the library's back room felt like a war room. Mendez arrived with a tall, sharp-featured man in a gray suit and a worn leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Caleb Rines. No small talk, no pleasantries. The use of multiple shell vendors, forged documents, and structured deposits suggests a deliberate scheme to avoid detection, he said, flipping through the evidence. If she deposited those funds into personal or family-owned accounts, we're looking at wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy, multiple felonies. She also used HOA funds to pay for a private security system, I added. Installed it at her own house last year. Labeled it as community surveillance. Rines raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of that?" I pulled out a printed invoice from the same folder. "Installation address is her private residence. We confirmed with the vendor." They thought they were being reimbursed by a neighborhood watch program. Rines nodded slowly. "We'll need sworn statements and bank access." Denise passed him a stack of signed affidavits from several residents, along with a digital drive containing every document we'd collected so far. "This is more than HOA mismanagement," Rines said. "This is organized theft. She abused her fiduciary duty, defrauded residents, and used her position to enrich herself." "I'll file a motion to impound all associated accounts by the end of the week." Mendez added, "We've already frozen her primary checking account. Next, we're going after any property purchased with illicit funds." The tide had officially shifted. What started as a neighborhood nuisance had become a federal case. 2 days later, news broke across every local channel. Theresa Zimmerman had been indicted by a federal grand jury on 12 counts related to fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her assets were frozen. Her passport was revoked. She was being held without bail pending trial, but the fallout wasn't over. The same week, the county issued a formal condemnation of the illegal clubhouse. A demolition order was signed, and a local contractor volunteered to bring it down free of charge once the investigation concluded. The fireplace Theresa had loved so much was now roped off behind hazard tape, and the once busy patio was overrun with weeds. I was standing at the site one morning, watching the Crewmark utility lines, when Howard, the retired colonel, walked up beside me. "Didn't think I'd live long enough to see justice come to this neighborhood," he said. "She buried herself with her own paperwork," I replied. He chuckled quietly. "And you handed her the shovel." The HOA, now under full interim control, called for a new election, not for show this time. Open ballots, verified tallies, public candidate forums. Residents actually showed up. They asked questions, demanded answers, and refused vague promises. Denise ran for president. I didn't run at all. I'd done what I came to do. She won in a landslide. On her first day in office, she took down the framed photo of Theresa that had hung in the hallway of the old clubhouse. She didn't replace it with her own. Instead, she posted a notice that read, "Transparency lives here now. Ask anything." The new board instituted a rotating audit schedule, public Zoom streams of all meetings, and a hotline for reporting suspicious activity anonymous, if desired. The HOA's budget was posted online monthly, with every expenditure categorized and verified. As for the clubhouse, the land was cleared within 2 weeks of the demolition order. The space was opened up and landscaped into a community garden, complete with raised beds, a tool shed donated by a local hardware store, and a shaded bench where residents could read or just sit quietly. No walls, no secrets. On the first Saturday after the garden opened, I walked down with a cup of coffee and found 2 kids planting herbs with their grandfather. Nearby, Denise was showing a group of residents how to use the irrigation timer. She looked up and gave me a nod, not a wave. Not a smile that said, "Look what we did." Just a quiet acknowledgement. We'd taken back something that had been stolen, not just money, not just space, trust. That night I sat on my dock, the lake glassy and still. My jet ski sat where it always did, chained, silent, harmless. No one was trying to find me for it. No HOA president was lurking with a clipboard. No hallway meetings where decisions were made in whispers. The neighborhood had found its voice again. And this time, it was speaking out loud.